welcome to this summit. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Cora Bilsker, and I'm a counselor with the PineappleSupport network. And today I'm going to be talking about knowing your worth, maintaining emotional health throughout your entire career. So I'm a social worker, but I work in private practice doing counseling in Victoria and Vancouver, BC, and online too if you're further away. I primarily work with people in unconventional relationships and structures in their life. That tends to include anything from people who are sex workers, who are in the adult industry, in non-monogamous relationships, who are queer, who are kinky, or who are integrating psychedelic experiences into their life. So I like to joke with my clients, it's really difficult to shock me, and that's kind of the type of counselor that I try and be. So today I brought my partner Cody with me to ask me some questions about the topic and hopefully help stimulate discussion around some of the things I want to cover.
Thanks, Cora.
Thanks for coming.
My pleasure. So I'm wondering, what is it from your practice that gives you personal insight into self-worth and self-esteem?
Oh, it's almost all of what we talk about. No matter where people are in their lives, I find it's really difficult for people to look inside for that sense. And there's a lot of things competing in our world to either give us that sense of worth or take it away. You can look at how much money is in the beauty industry or how important it is to people that they feel that sense of acceptance and community, or the way that careers are important to people. And it's a really big deal when they're not receiving that validation from the outside world. That can sound like just some people, but through my practice, I really feel like it's all of us who struggle with that. And it's so important for boundaries and resilience and just like stability in this world to be able to have a source of that inside of ourselves, not one that we have to look elsewhere for, because looking elsewhere for that can give other people the power to change our emotional state and how we're doing. And that can be risky.
An interesting thing that we were talking about just a minute ago was the difference between esteem and worth. Esteem being our own sense of status, or the status others think of us with, and worth being a very financial idea, sort of a framing that comes out of this capitalist system that we all live and work within. And when we talk about self-esteem or self-worth, that's this process of trying to determine that value by ourselves rather than have it determined by someone else. And so I'm wondering if you might be able to comment on maybe what you see as the difference between the two, or how that shows up in the people that you work with in practice.
I think the word esteem as opposed to wealth really invites people to connect with their own recognition, to know how it is they wish to be treated and what is important about what they have to offer. Worth sounds a little bit more external to me, that someone's wondering if they're worthy or they have a place in this world or people value them. But to be honest, like, I have a tendency to use both interchangeably because this language around money weaves its way into our conversations about emotion and relationships all the time in a way that's really helpful to break down.
Yeah. And there's this temptation, right, to locate that sense of self-worth in what we're paid, especially in the adult entertainment industry.
Yeah, and that's especially difficult, and why it was really important for me to talk on this subject today, because I know that the experiences I've had, not directly in like the adult industry where you're being hired to perform, but I've had experiences with cam shows online, and one thing that I found is it was really tempting to be having a bad day and go online and do some shows and make money. And I expected that that would help me feel better. And yeah, like sometimes it does. And that's okay, you know. But there was times that it didn't, and it left me really confused as to why that exchange wasn't working. It really made me realize that money does not necessarily make it into like our emotional recognition all the time. And if we don't have other ways to get that recognition, then the people who were watching my show and deciding whether to pay me or not were the ones that were now changing how the rest of my day went. And at a certain point, that didn't feel safe. So I don't think necessarily it's these industries that aren't allowing for emotional safety at all. I think there's ways to be in every industry and make sure to protect what you know is how you want to be treated, and to protect yourself from other people's projections.
Mm-hmm. So I think it sounds like what you're saying is that the truth is that self-esteem or self-worth really can't be purchased.
No.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what sorts of tools would you say are helpful to help protect that sense of self-esteem?
Yeah, that's something that I'm asked a lot, because these concepts can be really vague and really abstract, and my clients will go, wow, that's a really great point you made. How? Like, what's the path from getting to where we're at now to what you're talking about? And a minute ago I was just saying something about projection. This is a concept I go on about extensively in my sessions, and to you, to everyone I meet, because so often we forget that other people are making assessments about what they witness in the world through the eyes of their own experience. And this is not just happening once in a while. I think we all know it can happen once in a while. But I'm here to share, this is my belief, that it's actually happening constantly. And so when we give people the ability to tell us what our worth is and what they think of us, and how we should feel about ourselves, because we perceive them as being some sort of impartial source that's more truthful than ourselves, that's less biased, they're actually so much more biased. They're biased in a way that might not work for us. And we might end up taking the feedback from someone that has had totally different life experiences than us, that is projecting their view of the world that works for them onto our experience, and then internalizing that says something about who we are. And why, I just want to ask, why are we trusting other people with this when you've lived your entire life with yourself? Who could know you better than you? I really invite you to build trust in that kind of concept. And so one of the tools that I suggest is simply being aware of projection. When you feel rejected by someone, when it's hard to remember that maybe you weren't hired for a certain film because, not necessarily because you weren't good enough, but maybe because that director, for instance, had a different idea about how it was going to go. Or there's some part of it that you don't know that might be weighing into what's happening. That taking it personally can be really damaging over time and really start to weigh on us.
So, can we talk about a foundation, like that foundational self-awareness or self-recognition as the basis from which to proceed with confidence in the world?
Yes. One thing that really goes into that foundation is understanding how you became the person that you are, understanding what you have taken on, sort of like a tumbleweed from your family, from people that were around you when you were small, from the media and our culture that stuck to you, and that you might not recognize as other people's stuff. And making really conscious decisions to choose which parts of that you want to pick up and decide to carry into the future, and which parts maybe don't work for you, and becoming like an active participant in that process. Counseling can help a lot with that. A lot of the reason you hear the cliche in counseling of going back to childhood and talking about what happened to you when you were young is that we were really, really impressionable when we were young. You're entering the world still learning how to tie shoes, right? So every example you're getting about how to be a human adult in this world is coming from the ones that you end up having around you. And they might be doing it in a way that works for them, but it's not necessarily what's going to end up working for you. And so developing an understanding of why the people in your life might have been doing what they were doing and what your story is around that can help you build that foundation for knowing yourself, knowing how to hold yourself in high esteem, and knowing when the people around you aren't treating you in the way that you envision your life being. So there's two that we sort of mentioned there in that foundation. To recap, there's being really aware of projection on the part of other people, and there's really understanding where you come from and making some clear decisions about what kinds of things you want to take into your future.
So tending to your emotional health really sounds like it depends on creating that very secure foundation, that sense of self-awareness, self-knowing
Yeah.
Within ourselves that can help increase our resilience to that rejection and manipulation and depression.
And, I'll touch on the depression thing a little bit more in a minute, but I just realized I should add that along with the way in which we're raised, I mentioned the media and the culture that we're into. A lot of what I do with my clients is unpack the cultural learnings we've received, because there's all kinds of ideas about, as I'm sure you've encountered or at least thought of yourselves, about what an acceptable career is and what it means to be doing a career where you're having sex with people on film. And there's a lot of messages, very gendered messages around sex for men and women in the world that are really heavy weights for a lot of people. And so, women are often told that their worth comes from how sexual and sexually desired of a being that they are. I run into a lot of women, not necessarily in the adult industry, that come into my office, and they have responses where they don't want to have as much attachment to that kind of validation, but there's this underlying craving that I feel can only be ancient. That it's been a really, really long time of the message that is where our worth comes from. So that makes the sex industries and the adult industry that much more difficult to separate out and use these tools that we're talking about, but that much more important too. And in addition, not just for women, but men are often told, that your worth comes from how hot of a woman or how sexual of a creature you can score. And that really does you a disservice, because it's not saying that there's something for you to have esteem in beyond how attractive you are to others. And when we live in a world like that, it really limits the creativity and the connection with ourselves that I think we can bring, and puts us in a world of people that are all trying to be appealing to each other and not really ever being their own people. So it's kind of an extreme example, but it's the kind of thing that, being conscious of, we can start to notice that as we go about our days, and when we notice our language, and when we notice that we're craving a sense of approval, like maybe when you really want to make that post on social media and it's almost like a compulsion. Like, what's going on there? What might you be missing? What might you be looking for? And where were you told that's what you need?
When you mentioned creativity a minute ago, it made me think about, in our work, we often aren't given that opportunity to be purely creative. Ultimately we're selling our time, and in cases selling access. And so do you think that there's a way to still sell that time and that access, but do so in a way that recognizes our innate ability to be creative in that, or even to exist and act as art in our work?
That to me is one of the most disappointing parts of the effect that capitalism as a structure can have sometimes when we are looking at our career and how creative we can be. Because we live in a world that rewards those that offer something that's most mass consumable, right? That's appealing to as many people as possible because then that's what they'll sell. And that's where I feel like creativity can really get lost. And it's not always possible to feel like you can have boundaries because that might limit your ability to make money and survive in this world. But it's through boundaries that I really feel like that's where we can shine. That's where we can start to have more diversity and more of who people are coming through in the work that they do. And so I'd encourage you, when you're selling your time and your access, let's be clear, not your body, that you see if there's any opportunities to assert what about that process works for you, um, without being commanded by the fear that you need to say yes to everything to be worthy of holding that space. And you'll hear actually like a lot of business coaches and stuff these days encouraging people to have confidence in the unique aspects they bring to the work and set boundaries, because it can also do other people a service to know where your lines are. They can relax at times when they know they can rely on someone to be assertive. And my hope is that we can create a world where that's more okay and where that's more acceptable.
It sounds like with a disempowering relationship with our work, that can feed into insecurity.
Yeah.
And undermine that foundation of knowing our own self-esteem, and being misrecognized for our worth. But that the opposite of that is coming at our work from a place of empowerment and security, and a correct recognition of our worth. How do you think people can go about making sure that they tip one way rather than the other?
Well, like I said, it's hard to do if you don't really feel like that's safe in order to be able to survive. So I do want to acknowledge that there is a privileged aspect to being able to have the emotional resources to set those boundaries and be so clear with people. But the weight and the collective struggle that it can place on people to be in environments where they're not surrounded by those that respect them can really add up over time. I think in a way that we expect ourselves to be able to handle, that people around us might expect us to handle because it's a job you're getting paid. So deal. I'm here to provide counsel to my clients, and I don't have a lot of motives of my own as I go through that. The whole process is about you and your process, and how we can make that work better. But the motive that I do have in a counseling session is to look for signs that someone is really valuing themselves, and to encourage people to nurture and stand up bravely for what is going to help them live healthier lives, to be able to see why that's so important. And I know that there's a lot of things going against it, but that's what I mean. Like, this is my job, is to remind you how important that is, and then it's up to you how you make that happen in your life.
So if money is often equated with a sense of worth, how many jobs can we get, how desirable, sought after we are in our work, that does play into our sense of worth, and also gives others power over our emotional health. That what it sounds like you're saying is that the path toward resiliency and increased self-worth is to really start to be strong in our boundary setting, and our own recognition of what we're worth to ourselves, that security in our own selves.
Yes, to really trust ourselves, that we know better than anybody what we need. And I believe that about everyone out there, that you don't need someone else to tell you the truth. Like, you know. And I have a lot of people question, am I a good person? And part of what's inherent in the work that I do is believing that everybody has the potential to be good people. and that when they're in an environment of love and free of shame and like truly being modeled acceptance, and they start to internalize those sorts of things themselves, that they'll treat others better. And a lot of people don't, or like at least a lot of our cultural systems don't really seem to be built on that. We often talk about punishment as being the only motivating factor. And so I really encourage people to remember that when they talk to themselves, because a lot of people talk to themselves and say really terrible things in order to motivate themselves. And they look to other people for that validation. And when they don't hear great things, they think, oh, well, that probably makes sense because how else would I improve? And I'm absolutely here to challenge that speaking to yourself positively and holding yourself with love and acceptance will help make you a good person. It's not that it will make you selfish and unable to care for others. I really think it's the opposite.
Negative self-talk really does us harm, and confidence really is sexy.
Yes, yeah. Something we say to each other often. So it looks like we're just about at the end of our time.
Well, thanks, Cora, for sharing with us the things you've learned through your practice and through your personal experience.
Thanks everyone for listening. And if you'd like to get in touch for counseling, my website is Nested Heart Counseling. It's spelled the Canadian version of the word, COUNSELLING.com. And I'd be really happy to talk to you about the ways in which we can work together to implement these sorts of ideas in your life and make it personal. Thanks so much.